This is Penny. Welcome to my studio. In this video I'm going to show you how I make this particular flap design. You'll need a lot of patterned fabrics. Basically I used all patterned fabrics for the flap. The important thing with the fabrics, the patterned fabrics, is they need to be, when you sort of look at them all together, they need to be a very similar tonal value. Nothing super dark and nothing super light. And that way they blend in, the colours blend in really nicely together. And the idea was to cut them into little rectangles. It didn't matter what size they were all different. They were all rough cut. And they all had small patterns. A few of them had slightly larger patterns, one of which was made a feature pattern in the end for the center of the bag. But yeah, it's small patterns. The colors need to be fairly compatible. And once again, I made the mistake of putting something in that was too light. I used a beautiful little white flower fabric that I bought and have never found it fitted on anything that I've made. And I used it again on this and made another mistake. But then those of you that view my videos will know I'm very good at making mistakes. Fabric and repeated it over the square so that there was some sort of semblance of order to it with a bit of repetition. You can see the scale of the patterns. They're pretty much all small. You can see from my thumb how the scale is. And to start with, I just made a square. I laid out rectangles of different pattern fabrics all over it. I cut them, as you can see, I cut them pretty roughly, and I overlaid the edges, and they were slightly creasy, but that doesn't matter at all. You won't notice that when it's finished. I sprayed the square sheeting with applique adhesive, and then I laid the rectangles on and then sewed them down. They just basically one single line of stitching to sew them into position was all it needed. So we're going to look at making this particular bag flap. And yours, of course, because you're using different fabric, will look different, but the basic principles still apply. So you need the clothing, women's blouses, shirts, anything that it can be synthetic or natural, it doesn't matter. And you also need wide organza ribbons. The colours are not absolutely critical, just so long as they look good together and over the fabric, that's all that matters. The ribbons are 38 millimeters wide, and they actually kind of make the fabric look like it does, so it's pretty important to have them. You can manage with maybe 3 or 4 colours. You don't need a whole heap. I used a purple. I think I used then a lighter purple, and I used a lemony yellow and a sort of a neony green type thing. And I sort of laid them the colours alternatively, like a violet, then a yellow, then a violet, then green, and just pinned them over the top. Part of the magic of this flap is the overlaying effect, and you can't really get away without a couple of variations of organza ribbon, wide organza ribbon. It does create the finished look that I don't know what else I would have used to do that. If you use a fabric soldering iron, you could possibly cut your own widths of organza, right, to make them look like ribbons, because that will seal the edges. But other than that, yeah, you need the right ribbon. You can see where I have laid my ribbons over the underlying pattern. And I've laid them all one way to start with, and then I've laid a couple of my favourites, which were the violet ones. I laid across in the other direction too, just to add a bit of interest. I didn't want to hide any of the patterns underneath, so I didn't want to make them too thick. So there you can see it before they're stitched down. Now I used one specific kind of wandering open machine embroidery stitch, and I used an olivey green, I think, a cotton, yeah, olivey green cotton. I could have used any colour. Whatever colour I used would change the effects, and I tend to go for olivey green when I want something not to be too obvious, but just visible, but not too obvious. And if you look at this particular view, you can see my usual mistake. I've used that white fabric. I bought the white fabric ages ago, and I really like it. It's got tiny little flowers, a bit like poached eggs. And I've tried it in 3 projects, and I've never found anything that it looked right on. I know it's got potential, so I think I'm going to have to use it in a very high key work with a lot of other whites and yellows. But it's wrong here because they're the lightest parts, and they're not in the right places, and they stand out too much. So I wasn't happy with that. I stitched that particular loopy stitch about every centimetre, and then I went across it the other at 90 degrees. So I've got this nice little grid over the top of it, and that tends to hold everything down really well. To hide the whites areas that I didn't like, all of the light areas, I didn't really have much choice, but I selected to use a sort of random webbing that I got. I got it online, and I'll put the address underneath the video if you are interested in buying it. It's just a polyester webbing, netting type thing. It comes in different colours. I find the black one is the one that allows the base to show through better than any of the other colours. I bought half a dozen colours of it, but I've only ever used the black, so yeah. And I laid that over, strips of that over the areas that had the white in it. I didn't plan to do that in the beginning, but I just made the error, so I went with it. I put one strip across in one direction, and here you can see that, and then I had to hide the other white area, so I put it at a strip at 90 degrees, which meant that the centre of the panel was a bit dark, but I thought I'd make an applique flower to go on that. I went over the netting with the same stitch that I'd used to go over the fabrics, but I used a deep cerise pink rather than the green, and actually it doesn't really show very much at all. Once I had the square covered and the netting down, I thought I didn't know what to do with it because somehow or other it just wasn't working. And so I looked at appliquing small flowers onto it, or also making large, circular burnt flowers. But nothing really was what I wanted. So I figured, okay, just do a simple daisy in the centre over the dark area, and which I did. And it wasn't a very nice daisy. I didn't do a very careful drawing. I just made a really stilted one, and I didn't like it at all. But I kept persevering because sometimes I just don't know when to stop. And I stitched it and stitched it and stitched it until I ended up with a heavily stitched daisy that didn't really look any better than when I started. So I cut it out of the centre, and I figured I had to use the leftover strips rather than the square of fabric. This video is a good example of, making mistakes, more than one here, and then not giving up, and the end result is completely different to what you imagined. But it's a case of not giving up, and sometimes that leads to really nice works. I then cut three of the pieces actually, I cut in half because they were quite wide, so I ended up with what you can see here. And the wide piece I used for flowers at the end. Also notice that they're not quite straight. They're I had to trim them with scissors just to even them up a little bit. I wasn't worried again. I could have cut them with a circular blade and got it accurate, but yeah, I didn't worry about that too much. I selected these 5, and the one with the large flowers on I thought I'd use for my central panel, which I actually quite like. The large flowers, I thought they came out quite nicely. So yeah, that's roughly the order that they're going to be in now on the bag. And here I've cut the underlying polyester green furnishing fabric that looks a bit like denim and feels a bit like velvet. It's so soft and fluffy. It's like really brushed and beautiful fabric. And that I laid my centerpiece on a strip, and then laid the others onto the base, the size of my panel. And then I cut strips of wadding narrower than the pieces. The lower one is just not much narrower than the little fancy piece of fabric, and the top one is the width of the panel that I want, and I will put that underneath the green and turn the edges in to give me the size that I want to lay the small strip onto. Now it's turned in, and it's now time to lay the centre panel on top of that with the thin strip of wadding in between. Here I've used a fancy embroidery stitch in a sort of purple, dark purple colour, and I've done it all around the edge. I actually quite like using an embroidery stitch around the edge. I think it camouflages the raw edge quite nicely. I use little tiny glass violet beads, little seed beads on it. Don't have to do that, they hardly show, especially as I've got a flower on it, but yeah, it just adds that little touch of glitz. I've turned up the bottom of the green fabric for the flap and left the centre one to protrude down, and I've added one part of the magnetic clasp to the bottom of the flap that protrudes down, and that's the final position. I'm now going to sew them in with the same stitch that I used on the centre piece. I cut the leftover wide strip. I used the white in this instance because I thought I wanted the difference in colour and values to make the flower show, so I cut the white into the large one and then 3 other colours, and I used the bright purple in the centre. And then I sort of I put the petals on so that I had dark against light and light against dark wherever possible. And so you can quite clearly see that there are 4 layers of petal there. I'd burnt the edges too, because some of it was polyester and some of it was cotton. They just sort of burnt differently, but it sealed the edges and gave them that nice black look, and where it was polyester it sort of melted into a hard edge. I tried the flower in different places. I finally decided to keep it just above the beaded area, just under the large flower, which I think probably is quite a nice balance. Here you can see the bag from the side, and you can see that because I didn't make the body of the bag wider than the flap, they were both exactly the same size. I had to attach my handles on the outside, otherwise they didn't look too good, and they pushed the flap in. This is probably the most accurate colour-wise. It's pretty much like it is. The panel is it's sort of really unusual because it's got the organza ribbon over it. It's just got a really soft, almost a magical fairy tale look about the top. And I really like it. Not that I'm going to keep it, of course, because I don't use my own bags, but yeah, I think it's a nice bag. Typically slightly wonky. And of course I've added the other half of the magnetic clip to the bottom of the bag body and sewn it pushed it right through and added a piece of stiff denim on the back of it so that it can't pull out. So it's fairly sturdy. You'll also notice that I added a flat glass bead. It's a purchased one, and it's like cane. It's got little tiny flowers running through a cane of it. To see exactly how I made this, the basic bag that this flap was attached to, go to my video called Let's Make Fabric from Scraps number 5. I'm not saying that's the right way, it's just the way it works for me. So that's that design, and I really quite like it. I think I'll be doing others. I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't made the mistake of the flower. I hope you've enjoyed it, and that you'll try the organza overlay, organza ribbon overlay. Obviously I didn't burn anything away with this one, so it just really looks really nice with a fine grid stitch all over it. Strips too can also, leftover strips or wasted areas that would otherwise just be, maybe not used. The strips make really nice bookmarks as well, or you just have to satin stitch the edges or mount them on another piece of fabric, and you'd have some really nice magical looking patterned bookmarks, which might make nice gifts as well. Don't forget to visit my Crevado site if you're interested in seeing a huge range of work, because I don't only do fabric work, and it's pennyema.crevado.com, and I will put that under the video. I hope you enjoyed watching this little video. Until next time, thanks for watching.